Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guest on this next interview. France and Germany are taking steps to deepen European nuclear cooperation, while Poland has begun formal talks with Paris on France's extended deterrence framework. As questions grow about Europe's security architecture and the future role of the United States, these developments could reshape NATO's deterrence posture. Joining us today on TVP World to discuss what this means is Mark Toth, co-founder of Intrep 360. Now, Mark is a national security analyst who specializes in U.S. foreign policy, NATO, and the evolving strategic balance in Europe. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Great to see you, Benjamin. Greetings to you and your viewers.
So now we're looking at Germany preparing to participate in the French nuclear exercise, while Poland also has launched formal deterrence talks with Paris as well. Are we witnessing the embrace of a genuine European nuclear architecture, or are we still looking at largely symbolic political moves?
You know, Benjamin, it's a great question because I think at this point it's just emerging. Europe is understanding that with this doubt that President Trump has created about U.S. security commitments in Europe, that it needs to have a nuclear umbrella of its own. And so this is a start. The cooperation between Germany and France, is important because the Rafale fighters that carry the nuclear weapons that the French have, do need support. They deliver these nukes by air. They're cruise missiles launched from these aircraft. And they're looking for German Eurofighters to escort them in those missions. So to be able to start to coordinate that, to work together, to participate in exercises is important, especially since France itself does not participate in NATO's nuclear sharing exercises. So just the nuts and bolts of it from a military compatibility standpoint, interoperability, if you will, is key. And so I think that's what you're saying between France and Germany developing. It's basically France saying, we realize that we've got to extend this deterrence forward, but we also have to extend the number of partners that we have. And then obviously Poland would be a key one, given its proximity to Russia and to Belarus.
Right. You mentioned France wanting to extend its nuclear umbrella forward, but at the same time, Paris also insists that its nuclear force remain under the sole authority of the French president. Now, does that strengthen the credibility of deterrence, or does it actually show some sort of limitation?
It's a little bit of both. Look, the deterrence can work, especially if we reach a point where, on a rotating basis, so far, nothing in the talks between Tusk and Macron have indicated that Rafale nuclear-capable fighter planes would be stationed in Poland permanently. But that forward deployment of them, especially given the vulnerability of cruise missiles, they're easier to shoot down than the strategic assets, for instance, that the U.S. has with its intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles, could prove valuable. But at this point, I think it's just a question of these emerging, these talks, and that in order for Europe to create its own deterrence, it's going to have to get a lot further than it has. France's is fairly simplistic. It's a diad, meaning it's no longer a triad. There's no longer any land-based missiles. They're either launched by air or they're launched by nuclear submarines. And the problem with their subs is there's usually only 1 out of 4 that are patrolling at any given time, and that makes it easy for the Russians, for instance, or China potentially, to intercept them. So this is a start, but it's by no means something that Europe can rely on completely. They still need to rely on the U.S. nuclear shield because it is truly a triad, and the intercontinental ballistic missiles are the most important part of that.
Right, and speaking of reliance on the United States, now Poland is one of those countries that has long relied on the U.S. nuclear umbrella. Is there a way where Warsaw can deepen cooperation with France without creating some sort of uncertainty when it comes to NATO's command structure, or kind of impact the transatlantic unity in one way or another?
Right. No, Ben, it's another great question because I think it's in Poland's best interest to pursue a parallel track, because they're complementary. Essentially, the types of nuclear weapons, B-61 gravity bonds that the United States keeps in Europe, they're spread across 7 bases in 6 countries. These are dropped from the air. They're not guided. They're basically tactical weapons that the pilot can control, how many kilotons is actually dispersed on any given deployment. deployment of them. And those are more of, a stop a Russian army in its tracks kind of tactical weapon. Whereas the French program, what they have with cruise missiles are deeper strikes. They're supersonic. They can go further. Obviously, they still have those vulnerabilities that I talked about, potentially getting shot down or interdicted by the Russians. So I think from, Poland's standpoint, I think they could see both. I think Poland should and probably can make the argument that at some point B-61 bombs that are stored by the U.S. and these other countries, other NATO countries, could also be stored in Poland before deployed. And it would work the same way. The United States controls those different munition wings of it, have them under secure, lock and key, and the United States controls the codes. But they're on the front lines, and that would give, Poland a much stronger nuclear deterrent on its borders that would have to give the Russians second doubt whether or not they want to invade Poland, or for that matter, invade the Baltic states.
Right, so it does seem like Poland can perhaps juggle the alliance with the United States and France as sort of some complementary move. But when it comes to the German-French kind of cooperation and large talks about the nuclear sharing as well, do we see Europe building a stronger European pillar within NATO, or are we actually looking at Europe quietly preparing for a future where the United States plays a less dominant role?
Yeah, Ben, I think what we're seeing so far is that Germany realizes it needs a second solution, given the doubts about U.S. security commitments. But we're not seeing something on a European basis where they're coming up with an alternative to what NATO can provide. Because, simply as I mentioned before, France only has certain components of it. They're vulnerable. They're not as exhaustive in terms of capabilities as the United States are. And so I think if Europe is to truly develop that kind of nuclear deterrent force, it's got to go far beyond where they're at now. And to do that independent of the U.S. would be tricky. I think the better play here long term is look at this as a complementary opportunity. It creates a new headache, if you will, for Russia to think about that nuclear deterrence is multifaceted now, or potentially would be multifaceted now in Europe, either through the French or the U.S., but then to continue to deepen the relationships with the United States, because you truly need that triad defense. And by triad, again, I mean, delivering these, intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are delivered from the United States, the submarine-launched missiles, the United States Ohio-class nuclear subs are far more capable than what the French have. And while those aren't permanently deployed in and around Europe, they can be strategically as needed. And then obviously the air delivery of nuclear weapons as well, be it from B-52s or from F-35s on a tactical basis. So I really do think that it's important when it comes to nuclear deterrence, because that really is all Russia has left, is that Europe and the United States have to remain on the same page. It's just too important to European security as a continent.
All right, now, speaking of giving something for Russia to think about, what do you think Moscow is interpreting these meeting and these cooperation? Do you see it as stronger deterrence on Europe's side, or is there some strategic ambiguity, or even might be viewed as a crack in the alliance?
Yeah, they could. Russian disinformation is good. The most likely what they'll try to do is argue that this is somehow a crack in the alliance. And, arguably there is. I mean, we have to pay attention to the elephant in the room, that there are significant European doubts about U.S. commitments to, security commitments. However, I don't think those extend to the nuclear side. That's too important. That type of nuclear deterrence is also too important to the United States in terms of making sure that Russia's strategic nuclear weapons and conventional nuclear weapons, meaning tactical, I should say, are kept in check. But I also think, for Russia, it's they might complain, they might be upset with it, but it's really no different than what they've been doing with Belarus. Their own forward deployment of nuclear weapons into Belarus is a means of trying to intimidate Ukraine. But like what the U.S. does, and like what France would be doing if it does do this in Poland at some point, they still control their own nuclear codes as well. It's not like Belarus can launch these weapons. It's not like Germany will be able to on their own from France, or, neither would Poland.
Right. Is there another world where these kind of a little bit of overlapping in roles and a nuclear umbrella would actually complicate Russians' calculations with various different nuclear security guarantees?
Ben, it's a great question because that's what my big takeaway from this. The opportunity for the West here is that even if Russia wants to view these, as you just mentioned, as cracks, in the NATO alliance, actually, I think the strategic ambiguity that it creates, it means they've got to make two calculations if they decide to take some kind of action inside of Europe. There's been a lot of talk whether or not they would try to do a red flag type operation in a NATO state, especially Poland or the Baltic states. And now this would complicate it. So I applaud the French for doing this. I think it throws Putin one more curve, and I don't think the European, continent is hurt by it. I think it only makes you safer as long as, the nuclear security arrangements between the U.S. and Europe remain intact, especially through NATO. And again, we've seen no sign of that diminishing. Still confident that nuclear deterrent shield from the United States will be there for Europe in the short term and in the long term.
Right. Now, France is calling this approach forward deterrence. Realistically, what would have to happen before the concept becomes a credible military capability rather than just political messaging?
Right. Yeah. Ben, I think it's interesting that Macron chose that word for deterrence. I mean, I think that is really aimed at Putin. It's basically saying, look, French, nuclear policy today has been really, a second strike basis. It's defensive. The idea is that it's to retaliate in the case of either the French or the Chinese attacking them. The fact now that he's talking about forward, it's not quite first strike type threats, like the U.S. had in the 1960s, that they maintained that option. But it's throwing this different kind of curve, and I think it's aimed at Putin. And I think, Poland is especially, given the size of your army, the largest, I believe, outside of Ukraine at this point in Europe, that would be key. And I think that's a good curve for him to be throwing. So I do think that this could become a powerful weapon, if the Polish and the French can negotiate a deal, and you have these occasional rotations, if you will, of these nuclear weapons, and through the Rafale fighter planes. And then I'd also add, though, that Poland has a lot more to offer, because you could do early warning radar stations to detect Russian, nuclear launches, tactical launches, etc., sharing of intelligence and the like. There's a lot more than just the nukes themselves. It's the military partnership that would draw the two countries closer together and just make that strategic nuclear shield all the better.
Right. And like you mentioned, this initiation is still in its early phases. But if we are kind of looking down the line, what should we be watching next to determine whether this is becoming something operationally serious? We're talking joint exercises, infrastructure, consultation mechanism, or something else?
Yeah, I think at this point it has to become what the Germans are going to likely do. It was announced at the conference, the Franco-German conference on Friday, that Poland has to start participating in these exercises too, like what Germany is going to do in the annual French nuclear drill called Poker. The Germans will be participating, providing conventional support. Now, no nukes are going to be involved. It'll simply be French Rafale fighters pretending that they're launching nukes and supported by German Eurofighters. I think Poland has to do the same thing and reach that same status. So I think, as you see Tusk and Macron move forward on this potential deal, is that exercise is the next thing. And it's really unfortunate. I think it would be a great sign for them to go ahead and participate in 2026. But, France just may not have that capacity to participate with that many partners, given that they only have 50 or so Rafale fighters in their arsenal. And there just may not be enough assets to go around to have a wider scale training at this point. But I hope in 2027 we're looking at Poland participating in a poker kind of drill with the French.
All right. So before I let you go, Mark, 2027, if we're having this conversation a year from now, what single development would convince you that France has indeed established a credible element of this European deterrence posture through its expansion of its nuclear umbrella?
Yeah, if they make the commitment, Ben. I mean, it's a great question. I mean, we all know that Macron is very good about talking about things. Sometimes this follow-through takes a long time. We saw it in Ukraine. We saw it with, how long it's taken him to get French fighters to the fight. He's offered before to put French troops on the ground, only to pull it back. So, from my standpoint, if it's 2027 and France is still talking about it, then I've got deep concerns that this deterrence approach can mean anything. But I am encouraged. Look, they're doing this drill for the first time with Germany. When you consider the historical differences between those two countries, the fact that they're participating in a nuclear drill is encouraging. And, I do expect, if I had to bet, if I had a crystal ball, I think they'll be doing the same with the Polish army in 2027. I hope so.
Right, so we'll definitely have to see whether or not this will become a pivotal point for NATO's nuclear deterrence. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it.
Always appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.